Hey there guys, my name's Griffin. I'm currently a senior in high school studying at Harmony School in Bloomington, Indiana, and I'd like to welcome you to my senior project. Before I jump into my project, however, I'd like to take a moment for those of you who are unfamiliar with Harmony and what a senior project is, so that I can give you the context of what it is that I've been up to for the past 3 months. Harmony is a project-based school that goes through their early childhood program all the way through high school. Before graduating, seniors are expected to leave traditional schooling behind for their spring semesters, and instead focus their energies on a semester-long passion project. In the past, students have traveled the world, made music, pursued their arts, and much more. So when it came time to decide what I wanted to do for my project, I had a lot of things to think about. One idea in particular, however, sort of stood out to me. You see, I've always been a fan of kayaking, and I have fond memories of spending time each summer at my aunt and uncle's lake house, where I really fell in love with paddling and being on the water. While I haven't been kayaking in a few years, the memories I've had with it have really stuck with me, and I've always wanted to have a kayak of my own. So, for my senior project, I thought it might be a great idea to try to build my own kayak. At first, I wasn't really sure how possible this was going to be. I'd watched some videos of people building kayaks, but everything I had found either looked too hard or like it wouldn't really make a great project. That was until I discovered Cape Falcon kayaks. Cape Falcon is a company dedicated to sharing the building, paddling, and love of traditional and modern skin-on-frame boat building. They are owned by Brian Schultz, who's been a multidisciplinary paddler for 23 years and a full-time skin boat builder for 17. They offer both online and in-person skin-on-frame boat building courses with in-depth instruction, years of knowledge, and a comprehensive video format. They also have lots of free information available online and on their YouTube channel. The designs available on the Cape Falcon website include their F1, F2, LPB, West Greenland, and East Greenland kayak. After reading about each of these kayaks, I chose to build an F1, as its beautiful design makes it not only great to look at, but also extremely versatile in the water. The combination of being light, having a flared hull, and having a short waterline reduces the drag through the water, allowing for a fairly low effort paddling experience. Not only this, the F1 also has a great cargo capacity, wonderful maneuverability, and can be customized during the building process in order to perfectly fit my exact body proportions. Cape Falcon's video courses are set up with a free prep course, a $200 building course, and then you pay $75 for whichever set of plans you choose to build. Once I'd purchased the Cape Falcon video courses, I began to look into nearby workspaces that would not only have the space required to build a 14.5-foot kayak, but also be able to supply me with the tools and expertise I'd need in order to complete the build. After doing a lot of research into spaces and not having much luck at all, I ended up taking my mom's advice to go out to California for around a month and stay at my grandparents' house. There, I'd be able to work closely with my grandfather, who has a lifetime of woodworking experience, quite a large deck for us to build on, and most of the tools needed to complete the build. After speaking with my grandparents, I booked a flight, and on the 15th of February, I boarded the plane to California, where me and my grandpa got to work. The first step was to build our work tables, which were made out of a large sheet of plywood, as well as a couple 2x4s we got at the local Home Depot. These were also the first things I ever built out of wood. This is kind of what our workspace looked like. As you can see on the deck, we had our 2 work tables here in the middle, right by the railing. And then around us, we had a few more tables that we were just able to scatter tools and scrap materials and other things of this sort to keep them out of our way. Once we had our workspace set up, we began collecting and gathering all the tools and materials we had, as well as ordering all the tools and materials we still needed. Luckily for us, Most of the materials are available in kits sold by both CapeFalconKayaks.com and skinboats.org. It's $250 for the skin kit, which comes with an 840 extra tough ballistic nylon skin, as well as their 2-part polyurethane coating system, and their tung oil finishing for finishing the frame. And then it's, I think, $300 for the Cape Falcon kit, which comes with all these things you see here, as well as the pre-built cockpit combing for the kayak. Once we had all the materials we needed, we went out to purchase our wood. The majority of the kayak was built out of a single 2-inch by 12-inch by 16-foot piece of red cedar that we picked out from Jackal Enterprises. It took us about an hour to look through all the stock of red cedar that they had and select the very best board available. But after we were done, you can see it loaded up onto my grandpa's minivan, where we then took it back to the house and got to work. Next, we took this 16-foot long piece of wood and started to mill it down into the individual cuts of wood that would later make up the frame of the kayak. Unfortunately, my grandpa doesn't have a sawmill or a big power planer. So we had to do this the old-fashioned way by setting up our two work tables long ways and running the wood through the saw in the mill. This was super time-consuming and ended up making not perfect cuts. We had a few deviations, such as on one of our gunnels, I think it was about 1/8 of an inch thicker on one end than the other end. But for the most part, we were able to get all our cuts done fairly well. And none of the oddities that we ended up having were actually consequential to the actual final build. Okay, so once we'd completed all of our cuts, we started mortising the gunnels. Basically, these mortises, the gunnels, how do I explain this well? Okay, so there are 6 deck beams in the kayak and 20 ribs. And each deck beam has to fit into little slots in the gunnels, as well as each rib has to fit into little slots in the gunnels. And these slots are called mortises. So the first step of our build was to create all of these mortises. In order to do this, we first marked where every single rib mortise slot would go, then drilled holes at the edges of each mortise. Next, we took a router, which is basically a drill that cuts side to side instead of up and down, and we routed out between the 2 holes. In the picture on the left, you can see the gunnels lined up with all of the rib mortises cut out and facing up. After finishing the rib mortises, we did all the deck mortises, which were a fair bit harder. This is because the mortises for the back 3 deck beams need to be cut in an angle, which can't easily be done with a router. Instead, we had to route these mortises up with a drill, which was stuck through a jig at a 25-degree angle. This isn't a perfect solution, and it required some fixing down the line, but it got the job done well enough. Once the gunnels were prepared, we then began building the deck. The first step was to build our 3 curved deck beams which go in the front of the boat. For these, we took 5 plies of cedar for each deck beam, glued them together, bent them over the deck beam laminating jig, and then clamped them up, as you can see in this picture on the left. They then sat for about 6 hours while the glue dried. While those were drying, we set up our gunnels in our spreader and capture forms, as well as with our ratchet straps to get the actual shape of the deck down. So that's what you can see in the middle here. We then laid our deck beams over the gunnels, marked them, and cut them down to size. After cutting them down to size, we started creating our tenons. This was a super time-consuming process, as each tenon has 6 different steps you have to follow, and there were 12 tenons to make. Once we were done and all the deck beams were ready to be put in place, we pried open the gunnels and stuck the deck beams in each slot. After this, we were able to take off all the straps and forms, and we had the entire deck built. Next, we turned over the kayak and started the ribbing process. Now for these ribs, while the rest of the kayak is mostly made out of red cedar, the ribs are made out of a special type of white oak, specifically clear, straight-grained, and never dried white oak. The reason it's so important to use this specific kind of wood, or a kind of wood that's almost as of high quality, is because you have to complete really tight bends to get the wood to the right shape. And most other types of wood will just crack under the pressure of these bends. Depending on the part of the country you live in, finding this really good rib stock for bending can be super hard. But luckily for us, Cape Falcon sells these ribs for $4 a piece on their website. So what I did is I just bought like 30 of them so I wouldn't have to worry about it. First, we took all the ribs and laid them down over the gunnels and cut them to size. Next, we had to round out all four corners of each rib, which was super time consuming as it meant sanding down each rib to almost a perfect oval that would be able to fit into the mortise slot. After we were done with this, the last thing to do was to bend the ribs into their shape and fit them into the rib mortises. So now we get to the biggest day of building of the whole project. This is because when you bend the ribs in place, you have to attach the keel and the stems on the same day. Otherwise, the ribs can sort of shift and you won't get the exact perfect shape you want. So at the start of this day of building, we had the ribs like this in what's called, in what's called a stegosaurus. Then one by one, we took each rib out and put them into this little box you can see here. I wish I had gotten a better picture of this box, but basically this is the steam box, and it has a little tube on the bottom that goes and fills the box up with steam. You take the ribs out of the stegosaurus and put them in the steam box for 8 minutes. And then when you take them out, they're super easy to bend for about 15 seconds, and then they harden up and lock in place. So you've got those 15 seconds to make the right bend, fit them into the mortises, and get the ribs shaped how you want it to. After we'd fit all the ribs in place, which you can see in this middle photo, we then took the stem and lashed it down over the kayak. Or the keel, I said the stem. We took the keel and lashed it down over the kayak. We then took the stems and attached them to the keel and lashed the keel to each rib individually. This took a long time. As for the lashing, you just have one super long, it was like a 18-foot piece of twine. And the twine is this artificial sinew, so it's like really waxy and gross to work with. It makes your hands all gross. We took this 18-foot piece of twine, and then we had to lash the entire keel to each rib individually with the single piece of twine. But after we got it done, the boat was looking like this. So going from this to this in one day was just really exciting for me. Next was to attach the stringers. This was really hard, honestly one of the hardest parts of building the boat, just because in order to get the stringers onto the shape of the kayak, you've got this really tight bend. So this really tight bend in the wood that just has a lot of tension pushing outwards. So as you're trying to lash it down and fit it into the perfect place, it's trying to go against you. And it's just super hard to work with. But eventually we got all the stringers lashed down into place, and we rounded out the ends on each side. Now, the reason we shaped these ends like this is because once you fit the skin over the kayak, if there are any sharp edges in the frame, they can create little tiny tears and rips in the skin that can be really bad for the life of the boat. So it's important. We had to round down the edges of every single piece of wood we made just to make sure there was nothing that was going to end up damaging the skin once we were done. Okay, so after I got the stringers on, there were a few miscellaneous things to do to finish the frame, which include creating these end blocks, which were basically just two pieces of wood that we glued to each end and then sanded down to create the shape of the frame here. The aft deck stringers, these two stringers right here and the deck beam in front of it are the only part of the kayak besides the ribs that aren't made of red cedar. And these are made of ash. The reason we use ash is because these often support the weight of the rider. And using a softwood like red cedar, it really shouldn't be something that's supporting the weight of the rider. So instead we use a hardwood like ash. I also created the foredeck stringer, which is just this piece that goes over the 3 front deck beams, and creates the bow shape, as well as, you can't see it in this picture, but there are little secondary stringers along the side of these gunnels that just add a little bit more stability in the water. Okay, so after that, the frame was done, and we had to paint the entire frame with this substance called Corey's Amazing Tongue Oil, which basically just finishes the wood, gives it a nicer look, and also protects the wood a little bit from natural wear and tear. So the problem with this process is that I had to paint every single surface of the entire frame. And if we go back one slide, that's a lot of surfaces. This took like 4 hours, and I hate painting. So this was like the worst part of the entire build. I just felt so awful by the end of it. But the frame was done, and it was time to get down to skinning. For skinning, after we completed the frame, we had to wait a couple days as we were waiting on a hot knife to come in the mail. And what a hot knife is it's basically just a knife, except the tip of it heats up really hot. And you need that because you have to make a lot of cuts in the skin. And if you make them with like scissors or just a regular knife or something, they can start to fray, and like that's not good for your skin. So instead you use a hot knife, which cauterizes your cuts as you go. Unfortunately, we waited like 4 days for this hot knife to arrive in the mail. And then the hot knife came, and it was a piece of crap. It didn't really work. But luckily for us, my grandpa's old soldering iron ended up doing the trick just fine. So that's what we use. So the first step to skinning was to drape the skin over the kayak and cut from here down this line you can see here. We cut down, and then we sewed that up and pinned the entire skin down onto the kayak. We then turned it over and pulled the skin up and made the cut so that it was like the right length, I guess, to perfectly fit over the kayak. I don't know if there's a better way to describe that, but we basically just cut it so that it was the right size. Next, we had to sew the skin onto the frame. So I took this picture of the kayak where you can sort of see how the stitching went. So first we had essentially what was here, and we had to pull this skin tight over the frame of the boat. So what we did is we took this black string and we ran it in this triangle pattern, and then we went down the frame, down like the entire length of the kayak, tightening it, and then went down the entire length of the kayak, tightening it again, and then went down the entire length of the kayak, tightening it again, until it was just really tight and pulled the skin all the way to where it was stretched over the frame. Next, after that was complete, we sewed up the skin and sewed on the combing, which was basically the last thing to do to make it look like an actual kayak that was boatable in the water. And that was when it was time to go. Unfortunately, due to the coronavirus outbreak, there was a lot of fear that airports in California might close down and I might not be able to make it home in time to complete my project, and I'd get stuck in California. So I booked an emergency flight out, and before the kayak was able to be completed, I had to leave. Now, fortunately, my grandpa was able to complete the kayak for me, and there was only like 3 hours of building that was left to do on the entire thing. So all that was left to do was to wet the entire skin by spraying down the entire kayak with a hose and then let it dry. And in the drying process, the skin just shrinks up a little bit, and any sort of wrinkles and not any parts of the skin that weren't quite tight over the frame will just shrink up and tighten when the skin dries. And then after that, there was the 2-part polyurethane coating process, which essentially you coat the whole boat in this 2-part polyurethane, which makes the skin not only waterproof, but also makes the skin a lot stronger. one of the most common questions I've gotten about this boat is the skin actually strong? Can it withstand hitting rocks? Will it get punctures? And I'm happy to say that that's not a concern. Brian Schultz, the owner of Cape Falcon Kayaks, has been making these boats for 17 years, and he said that he's never personally experienced a puncture, and he's had clients who've taken their boats over barbed wire and still never gotten a puncture in the skin. So it really is a really durable skin, and punctures aren't really a concern. Okay, so now that the kayak was finished, it was time to ship it. On the right, you can see it loaded up on top of my grandpa's car. To ship it, we used KAS Transport, which is this shipping company I found that basically just only ships paddle boats like canoes and um, those big racing rowing boats and stuff. They just ship paddle boats. So it was $600 to have the kayak shipped from California back to Bloomington, and it took about 4 weeks from when I left California to when I got the kayak back in Bloomington. And you can see here's a picture of me unloading the kayak back in Bloomington, where I was then able to take it out to Lake Monroe and give it its first spin. So here's a video of that. It's time to take the kayak for a spin, see if she works. Hopefully we don't sink, but I guess we'll see. Okay, so my final thoughts. I'm really happy with how this project turned out. I'm really happy with the kayak. It paddled around really well. One thing I noticed is that because it's so light, um, unlike other kayaks I've paddled in the past where they feel really stable. I don't want to say that my kayak felt unstable, but because it was so light, it just felt like any way that I moved my body at all, even like the slightest movement, had a lot of effect on how the kayak actually paddled, which I think will be great when I actually get the hang of paddling and I'm like, I've gotten good at it. But right now, it just makes the kayak feel a little bit unstable, which isn't great. But anyway, I'm really happy with how the kayak turned out. Um, I also want to talk about what could have been. There were a lot of ambitions I had with this project that I wasn't able to fulfill. Like I wanted to take the kayak on a road trip. I wanted to take it to Arizona. I wanted to go camping with it. There's a lot that I wanted to happen that wasn't able to happen, whether it was uh, for one reason or another. But I still feel really happy with how this turned out. And I don't think I would have done it differently. My advice to any senior or upcoming seniors at Harmony who are about to start on their senior projects is just to work on it and not worry about it being work, but just to do it because it's there. I think one thing you can get caught up in is like, oh, I really don't want to spend the next 3 hours working. But another way to think about it is, I'm not doing anything else this semester and I have 3 hours to work on this. Let's just do it because it's there. So that's my advice, I think. As far as budget, the original budget was $1,800. I ended up spending $2,000 on this project, which includes about $600 on procuring materials, another $600 to ship the kayak, $300 for the kayak building courses, as well as some other miscellaneous expenses. So my essential question: what does it take for someone with no experience working with wood to build a kayak? And how can the skills learned from doing so be transferred to other aspects of life? So for the first part of that question, what does it take for someone with no experience working with wood to build a kayak? Honestly, my answer is Cape Falcon Kayaks. They're such a great resource. Their videos are really good at explaining whether you have a lifetime of woodworking experience or no woodworking experience. I just think they're such a great resource, and I'm really thankful to them. I don't think I would have been able to make this project happen without them. And how can the skills learned from doing so be transferred to other aspects of life? Now, this is something for me that's been one of my favorite parts about completing this project is ever since I finished my building, if I'm, watching TV or watching YouTube or having to do anything with power tools, I just feel way more uh, competent around power tools, and like I know how to use all of them. I've had experience using all of them. I've seen what they do, what they can be used for. There's something to be said for being able to build stuff. And there's a lot now that I'm able to build that I wasn't able to build before. So I think that's the biggest takeaway I've gotten from this project. So yeah, thank you guys for listening. I want to give a special thank you to Cape Falcon Kayak and everyone on the Cape Falcon team. I want to give a special thank you to my grandparents for letting me use their house for the month that I was up there building the kayak, and for lending me their time and expertise. I'm honestly so grateful, and I wouldn't have been able to do this without them either. And I also want to thank my mom and my brother who helped me with this presentation, and helped me work through a lot of stress that I had towards the end of this project. And I want to thank you for listening and taking the time. So thanks for coming to my senior project. I've been Griffin, and I'm out.